They thought discipline meant silence, that if she didn't raise her voice, she wouldn't raise a hand. So when Captain Broderick slapped Lieutenant Commander Mara Kincaid across the face in front of 30 witnesses, he thought he'd won. No complaint, no reaction, no consequence. She just straightened her collar and walked out. But what no one knew was that she didn't walk away. She walked toward the correction. And by the time Broderick stepped into her night drill unprepared, by the time his pride hit the floor harder than his body, the entire base would learn what happens when you lay hands on the wrong SEAL. Now, before we show you how the system corrected itself and what happened when she finally spoke just 5 words, make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on. Drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, and stay right here. Because this wasn't about retaliation. It was about control. And the moment, discipline fought back. The fluorescent lights in Joint Tactical Classroom 4 hummed overhead, flickering slightly as if even they were uncertain about what was about to unfold. Lieutenant Commander Mara Kincaid stood at the front of the room, arms folded behind her back. The projector screen behind her displayed a clean, minimalist slide, behavioral command. Stress response, phase 2. No bells, no drama, just doctrine, control. Her voice, when she spoke, carried no volume, only clarity. Real leadership, she said, begins with how you react when you're challenged, not by threats, but by ego. 30 officers sat in the tiered seating, Marine captains, Navy lieutenants, a smattering of Air Force crossposts, all gathered for an interbranch module on psychological resilience under pressure. Captain Broderick sat 2 rows from the front, arms stretched wide across the chairs beside him, legs apart like he owned the oxygen in the room. His smirk never quite faded. Beside him, Lieutenant Hale muttered something under his breath. Broderick laughed. Mara ignored it. She'd been in rooms like this before, on firing ranges, in freezing water, in tribunal hearings. There was always one, usually 2, who mistook silence for weakness. Lieutenant Hale, she said, gesturing without looking up from her clipboard. You're up. Simulation scenario 4. Hale stayed in his seat, chewing the inside of his cheek. Pass, he said, loud enough to cut through the room. Not interested in make-believe drills today. Mara looked up. Excuse me? Hale leaned forward, his voice syrup thick with condescension. With all due respect, Commander, some of us prefer actual experience. 2 slideshows. A few chuckles rolled across the room. Not brave ones, nervous ones. Before she could respond, Broderick stood up, already walking toward her. I'll show how it's done, he announced to the room, voice booming. Real reaction, real stress. Let's see what your model says about this. He stopped 2 feet from her, chest high, jaw set. The tension cracked like a silent charge between them. Then he did it. A sharp, open palm slap right across her face. The room gasped, not metaphorically, not quietly. It gasped. Her head didn't move. No stagger, no blink, no emotion. Only the faintest turn of the cheek as her collar shifted with the contact. She reached up, calmly straightened it, then looked Broderick in the eye. You've just failed a real-world test, Captain, she said. One designed to measure restraint. Then she stepped away from the podium. Class dismissed. Nobody moved, not a breath, not a cough. Just the slow, soundless backpedal of egos, realizing they'd misjudged the center of gravity in the room. Mara walked out without another word, and by the time the first officer dared to speak, the door had already closed behind her. The U.S. Navy Advanced Leadership Academy in San Diego wasn't built for silence. Between the cadence drills, echoing whistles, and the low whine of jets overhead, quiet didn't last long here, but that afternoon, after the slap, it lingered. Rumors travel fast on military bases, faster when pride is involved. By the time Lieutenant Commander Mara Kincaid had returned her clipboard to admin and walked across the quad without a word, 3 versions of the incident were already circulating. One said she froze. Another said she whispered something that made Broderick back off before storming out. A third, more creative version claimed she was too stunned to speak at all. In the east hallway near the mess deck, 2 Navy officers exchanged a low conversation near the vending machines. She just stood there? Didn't flinch? took the hit and walked. What the hell kind of training is that? The SEAL kind, apparently. Bull. SEALs don't just take hits. In the officer's lounge, Broderick was telling it differently. She cracked. Didn't know what to do, he said, tossing a stress ball from hand to hand like it was nothing. Looked like someone unplugged her. I thought she'd bark or throw a tantrum, but nothing, just folded. He sipped from a paper cup like he hadn't just slapped a commissioned officer in front of 30 witnesses. Lieutenant Hale lounged beside him, nodding. She's all theory, no bite. Across the compound, however, not everyone was laughing. Commander Elias Rivas stood on the mezzanine level overlooking the lower quad, arms folded. He'd been watching Kincaid's movements since the morning. Not because he doubted her, but because he knew exactly what kind of person she was. He'd served alongside her in Djibouti before her knee injury. He'd seen what she could do when cornered. Now he watched her disappear into the side corridor that led toward the auxiliary facility sign-out desk. A staff tech jogged over to him minutes later. Sir, just letting you know, Lieutenant Commander Kincaid just signed out the close quarters reflex bay. Tonight, unscheduled. Rivas didn't blink. Who's on the participant list? The tech hesitated. Captain Broderick, Lieutenant Hale, 2 other candidates from her seminar group. Rivas nodded once. Good. Make sure the tower has eyes on it. No overrides. Back near the rec hall, a junior ensign named Fields hesitated outside Mara's office door. He'd trained under her 2 years ago, still remembered how she'd outshot 3 snipers during a confidence drill without ever raising her voice. He tapped gently. No answer. He tried again. Ma'am, just wanted to check. Are you okay? The door opened halfway. Mara stood in uniform, eyes tired but calm. No visible mark on her cheek. No heat in her voice. I'm fine, Ensign, she said simply. Protocol will correct itself. She closed the door gently. By 1700 hours, the sun dipped low over the Pacific, casting long shadows across the motor pool and barracks. In the chow line, conversations had changed. Less laughter, more side glances, more of, did you see the roster? And, she really isn't saying anything? Nobody had seen her file. But some knew the rumors. Naval special warfare, blackout operations. One said she swam 5 miles through frozen surf after a satellite link failed on a recon op in Norway. Another claimed she disarmed a hostage taker using just a metal pen. None of it had ever been confirmed. But nobody wanted to ask her now. They were waiting, not for her to respond, but for something they couldn't quite name. And somewhere beneath the weight of those whispers, Broderick laughed again. The locker bay near Building C had always smelled like something between chalk, metal, and sweat-soaked rubber mats. But that evening, it felt colder than usual, not from temperature, from the absence of motion. Lieutenant Commander Mara Kincaid stood alone in front of the full-length mirror bolted to the far wall, the fluorescent light above flickering slightly. Her uniform jacket hung neatly on the bench beside her. Her undershirt was regulation black, sleeves rolled once. Her hair, damp at the edges, was pulled back into a tight braid. The mark on her cheek was faint, not swollen, not red anymore, just a ghost of contact, an outline that most wouldn't notice if they weren't looking for it. She was, not out of vanity, out of purpose. She leaned closer to the mirror, fingertips grazing the skin like checking a memory for how real it still felt. A flash came, unbidden. Hell Week. Buds, Phase 1. She was 24, soaked to the bone, eyelids twitching from sleep deprivation. An instructor had screamed in her face, waiting for a flinch. She hadn't given him one, so he slapped her, hard, the kind of hit that wasn't for pain. It was for exposure, to see what would break. She hadn't broken then. She didn't break now. In that memory, her mentor had stepped beside her afterward, murmuring just loud enough for her to hear over the wind and salt spray. You don't flinch at pain. You respond to purpose. Mara looked at her reflection and repeated the line silently, her jaw tightening just enough to hold it in place. She turned toward her locker and opened it with one smooth motion. Inside, at the back of the top shelf, lay a small sealed pouch. Nothing tactical, nothing standard issue, just a soft black cloth rolled tight around a single item. Her old SEAL combat patch. She hadn't worn it in 3 years, not since the injury, not since her reassignment to psychological command instruction. But she'd kept it, not as nostalgia, but as compass. She unrolled the cloth, ran her thumb over the stitching, then placed it down on the bench, not to attach, just to see it in the light. She grabbed her logbook from the locker's bottom shelf, flipped to a blank page, and wrote 3 words across the top: reinstate demonstration protocol. Below that, she printed the date, then circled it once. She closed the locker with deliberate weight, the latch snapping shut with the precision of someone used to finishing what she starts. Outside, the base intercom clicked on, routine end-of-day announcements crackling through. Nothing changed. The chow hall schedule, the midnight shift rotation, the ambient world still pretending everything was normal. Mara zipped her jacket back up, tucked the patch away, and walked out without looking back. She didn't slam doors, didn't make noise. She simply moved through the corridor like a ripple through still water. Silent, exact, and headed for the one place on base where noise didn't matter, because what was coming next wasn't about volume. It was about control. By 1900 hours, the mess hall was a furnace of body heat, metal trays, and boiling conversation. The clatter of utensils on formica echoed off every wall, and the scent of overcooked chicken mingled with something unmistakable: nervous energy. Captain Broderick held court near the center aisle, boots propped on an empty chair, sleeves rolled to his elbows like a man who hadn't just publicly assaulted a superior officer. "She just stared at me," he was saying, mouth full, laughing between bites. "Didn't move, didn't blink, like a cardboard cutout in a uniform." A few at the table laughed, unsure if they were allowed to. Others just focused harder on their trays. Lieutenant Hale leaned in. "I almost feel bad," he said, grinning. "Almost." "You feel bad when you lose," Broderick shot back. "We didn't lose. We proved a point." At the next table, a junior officer, Ensign Forrester, kept his eyes on his food, but his ears on their conversation. He'd been in the classroom. He'd seen her face, seen the silence, and he didn't think it meant surrender. "She didn't raise a hand," Hale continued, stretching back in his chair. "Which is wild, considering all the SEAL crap they say she's done." Broderick's grin widened. "Maybe she's more talk than teeth." At the far corner of the mess, Petty Officer Lorne slid his tray aside and stood up without finishing his meal. He wasn't in Kincaid's chain of command, but he'd served long enough to recognize what controlled silence meant, and more importantly, what followed it. He walked the long way around the perimeter of the room and made his way to the operations tower. 15 minutes later, he knocked on Commander Rivas's office door. Rivas looked up from a training manual. "She's running it tonight, and..." Lorne said. Rivas didn't need to ask who. "You saw the schedule? She signed the reflex bay. Unannounced drill. And Broderick's on the roster." Rivas closed the manual gently. "Hale?" Lorne nodded. "Both of them, plus 2 other officers from her seminar. One of them told me she requested infrared tracking and observation clearance." Rivas let out a slow breath. "Did she log it?" "Logged and signed. Equipment confirmed." Rivas stood and crossed to the wall cabinet, pulling down a pair of observation goggles and a headset. "Good." Lorne raised an eyebrow. "Should we prep a medic?" Rivas shook his head. "No, but someone should be there to witness what real correction looks like." Back in the mess, the air had shifted again. Word had spread that Broderick and Hale had been selected for a special after-hours exercise. No briefing, no prep, no details. Just a direct request from Kincaid herself. Some joked about it, called it a redemption drill. Others weren't so sure. "Wait," one Marine whispered. "She's going to run it herself?" "That's the rumor. She's not going to fight, right?" No one answered. Because nobody was laughing anymore. Not really. By the time the base floodlights clicked on and the red lamps lit up around the training perimeter, 2 things were becoming clear. Mara Kincaid hadn't flinched, and she hadn't forgotten. The Close Quarters Reflex Facility stood at the southern edge of the Naval Leadership Academy, past the drone hangars and K-9 sheds. From the outside, it looked like a featureless gray box. No signage, no windows. Inside, it was a labyrinth of plywood hallways, adjustable walls, blackout zones, and infrared sensors. Every scenario from hostage rescue to ambush evasion had been run there at some point. But not like this. At exactly 2100 hours, the interior lights switched from standard white to low red combat illumination. Cameras clicked on from their ceiling mounts, feeding live footage to the control tower perched just above the northwest corner. A thin wall of glass separated the watchers from what would unfold below. Lieutenant Commander Mara Kincaid stood alone at the center of the briefing grid. Gone was the clipboard. Gone were the creased khakis and instructor's voice. She wore a fitted black tactical training uniform. Unmarked, regulation issued, sleeves rolled once. Her braid was tucked under a protective mesh cap. No body armor, no combat boots, just lightweight trainers and gloves that flexed without sound. Her stance was military neutral. Hands behind her back, legs evenly spaced to gaze forward. Commander Elias Rivas watched her from the tower with his headset on, silent. A junior training officer beside him whispered, "Sir, is this even a certifiable drill?" Rivas didn't answer. He was too busy watching what mattered. Down below, Captain Broderick, Lieutenant Hale, and two other junior officers entered the ready chamber. Broderick immediately clocked the lighting. "Going full Hollywood tonight, huh?" Hale smirked, nudging one of the others. "This is going to be fun." The two neutral participants didn't laugh. One looked like he wanted to ask a question, but thought better of it. Mara spoke, her voice perfectly even, amplified through the intercom. "This is a restricted light reflex certification drill. All participants will operate within the confines of Zone B. No live fire, prop weapons only. Full mobility authorized. Infrared tags will log contact points. Failure to comply with perimeter rules will result in administrative pullout." No one interrupted her, she continued. "This drill simulates response under confusion, verbal escalation, and unexpected contact. There is no start bell. There is no safety net. Movement begins when you do. Your reactions will be logged. Your conduct will be reviewed." Broderick rolled his shoulders. "Let's see if she can lead without her PowerPoint." Mara glanced over once, then tapped her radio mic. "Control, confirm system readiness." In the tower, Rivas spoke into the comm. "All systems green, visuals hot, comms clean." Mara nodded once. Her voice came low and final through the speakers. "Scenario start." Then she turned and disappeared into the maze of shadows, silent as gravity. The four men stared at one another. "What now?" one whispered. Broderick grinned. "Now we show her who's in charge." They stepped forward into the dim hallway. The walls narrowed. The air thickened. Their boots started sounding louder than they should have. The silence wasn't just atmospheric anymore. It was constructed, intentional, designed, and somewhere ahead, unseen but already watching, Mara Kincaid moved like a blade unsheathed. The red light bled across every corner of the training facility, turning plywood walls into looming silhouettes and doorways into voids. Nothing moved, no ambient hum, no fan, just the muted scuff of boots and the slow click of someone's nervous breath through a radio mic. Broderick was first to speak. "Let's clear it fast," he muttered, gesturing left. "She's probably trying to hide in a corner and make us guess wrong." Hale laughed. "She's a PowerPoint with a pulse." Their voices bounced back at them, softer than expected. The walls warped the acoustics, making every word feel a fraction too loud. They rounded the first turn. Nothing. "Zone clear," Hale said. "Moving on." At the rear of the formation, one of the neutral officers hesitated. "Was that?" A shadow shifted. Too fast. Hale barely turned his head before his legs swept out from under him. He hit the mat hard, back first, rifle clattering against the floor. A gloved hand hooked around his jawline, pinning him with just enough force to neutralize but not injure. "Hale, tagged, neutralized!" Mara's voice came through the facility-wide speaker, calm, measured, inevitable. Before Broderick could react, she was already moving again. "Where is—" he started, then spotted her dart through a doorframe to the right. He rushed, boots heavy, arms up in a clumsy half-guard, assuming brute force would do what training couldn't. Mara didn't meet his charge. She pivoted. One hand slid past his outer elbow, redirected his forward momentum, and sent his body twisting over his own center of gravity. He landed on his right side with a thud, his breath folding in on itself. Before he could recover, her knee was at his back and her arm had locked across his shoulder line. Broderick, tagged, neutralized. In the tower, Commander Rivas didn't move, didn't blink. He just said under his breath, "Holy hell." The two remaining officers froze in the outer corridor. They weren't targets, but the air around them felt loaded anyway. One of them turned slowly toward the infrared beacon near the ceiling, as if seeking an exit. Mara stood over Broderick, completely still. He groaned. "You set us up!" She didn't gloat, didn't lean in. She simply said, "You set yourself up, when you forgot your hands are weapons, not tools for humiliation." Then she stepped back, allowing him to struggle to his feet. He wobbled once, barely catching his breath. Hale sat in the far corner, back against the wall, looking like he'd been spun by a centrifuge. In the observation room, one of the junior trainers turned to Rivas. "Sir, I think that was a takedown protocol from Nessal CQC manual." Rivas nodded. "It was," and she left 2 steps out. Back in the main room, Mara tapped her comms. "Scenario complete. Extract personnel. Debrief in 15. The lights remained red. No one moved. Until she did. She walked through the hall with the same composed stillness she'd entered with. No sweat, no limp, no panting. Just footsteps. And silence. Behind her, Broderick leaned against the wall like it was the only thing holding him up. He looked toward Hale, then to the others, and then finally toward the control room glass overhead. For the first time in 2 days, he didn't have anything to say. In the tower, Rivas keyed the mic one last time. "Drill logged. Review board convenes 0800. Mara gave a single nod as she exited through the south exit. No celebration, no nods from the observers, no high fives, just quiet correction, and the memory of a slap that had finally been answered, with discipline. The conduct review room was a far cry from the training floor. No red lights, no plywood, just polished oak, institutional carpet, and air conditioning that never quite adjusted to the number of bodies in the room. It smelled faintly of varnish and regulation coffee. At the head of the table sat Commander Elias Rivas, sleeves rolled, glasses resting at the bridge of his nose. Beside him, Captain Ellen Monroe, senior adjudicator for the Naval Ethics and Conduct Committee, reviewed a folder marked Internal, Immediate. Across from them, Lieutenant Commander Mara Kincaid sat perfectly still, uniform pressed, no notes, no expression. The faintest pink ghost of yesterday's slap had fully faded. 3 chairs down, Captain Broderick shifted in his seat. Gone was the swagger. His left wrist showed minor bruising from the restraint hold. Lieutenant Hale beside him looked like he hadn't slept. Eyes bloodshot, jaw tight. Behind them, 2 neutral officers from the drill stood at attention, called to observe but not to speak. One of them hadn't stopped watching Mara since she entered. Rivas began without fanfare. This review has been called under Article 147B, Physical Misconduct toward Superior Officers. Evidence includes instructor logs, observation tower footage, and 5 direct eyewitness statements. He looked over his glasses at Broderick. "You may speak if you choose." Broderick cleared his throat. "It was a bad call, sir. A moment of misjudgment during an exercise." Monroe interjected, voice clinical. "The moment in question occurred during a lecture. A non-combat environment. Witnesses confirm it was not part of any role play or drill. Do you dispute that?" Broderick didn't answer. Monroe turned to Hale. "Lieutenant?" He stiffened. I didn't initiate anything, ma'am." "You participated in mockery, willful defiance of an instructor's authority, and collusion after the incident. Would you contest that characterization?" "No, ma'am." Rivas leaned back slightly. "Commander Kincaid, why didn't you file a report?" Mara spoke for the first time, voice quiet but unshakable. Because it wasn't necessary. The system doesn't need outrage, it just needs time. Monroe watched her for a long beat. You retaliated. No, ma'am, Mara said. I instructed, under approved training parameters. She slid a printed log sheet across the table, detailed timestamps, clearance authorizations, participant waivers, everything in order. Monroe flipped through the packet, lips tightening with respect. Rivas looked toward the two observers. Any objection to the conduct of the drill? One shook his head. The other spoke. It was surgical, sir. Nothing excessive. Just, exact. Monroe closed the folder. Then this is our ruling. She looked directly at Broderick. Captain Broderick, your actions constituted physical misconduct, professional insubordination, and reputational damage to this facility. Effective immediately, you are suspended from field instruction rotation and placed under administrative review pending reassignment. Broderick's shoulders sank. Hail. Formal reprimand. Documentation will follow. You are barred from further interbranch seminars for the duration of this quarter. Yes, ma'am. She turned last to Mara. Lieutenant Commander Kincaid, your restraint under direct provocation and use of procedural correction have been noted. A formal commendation will be entered to Regional Command under ethics and instructional control. Mara gave a nod. Understood. Rivas stood, signaling the close. Dismissed. No one moved fast, no one said a word, but as Mara stood and turned to leave, the junior officer who'd watched her throughout, one who'd never spoken, gave her a quiet, instinctive nod, not rank to rank, soldier to soldier. The sun broke clean across the eastern edge of the base by 0630. Long shadows stretched over the gravel parade grounds, and boots moved more deliberately than usual. The energy had shifted, less noise, fewer jokes, the kind of calm that didn't come from quiet hours but from something recently corrected. Lieutenant Commander Mara Kincaid walked the outer perimeter trail alone, same posture as always, back straight, gaze steady, hands tucked behind her lower back. No pomp, no entourage, no medal pinned to her chest. But those who passed her, those who'd seen what happened, stood a touch straighter now, not out of fear, out of recognition. One junior Marine, unfamiliar with her before this week, offered a quiet nod from the opposite walkway. Mara didn't break stride, but returned it with a glance, just enough to say, "You're learning." From the barracks walkway, Petty Officer Lorne caught up beside her, adjusting his cap as he matched her pace. "Morning, Commander." She nodded. "Lorne." He gestured back toward the chow hall. "They're real quiet today, even the officers." "They'll find their voices again," she said. "Hopefully they'll use them better next time." Lorne smirked. "Guess they finally learned the first rule." Mara glanced sideways. "Which one?" He smiled wider. "Never touch a seal." She didn't laugh, just gave a single exhale through the nose, like the ghost of a smirk might live there. They walked in silence past the West Range before Lorne peeled off. Mara continued alone toward the central admin block. Inside, Captain Broderick sat on a bench beside the personnel gate, alone, in uniform, a duffel bag at his feet, a waiting posture, not dismissed yet, but no longer part of anything moving forward. His eyes didn't meet hers as she passed, but his shoulders slouched with the weight of someone who now understood what he'd struck. She said nothing, no nod, no judgment, no parting wisdom. He wasn't owed it. Outside the instructor wing, two new candidates walked by, a pair of fresh officers just cleared for joint training. They didn't know the story, not yet. But they stopped talking when Mara passed, just long enough to notice the silence following her like gravity. She stepped into the staff hallway, paused briefly at the wall-mounted roster, and crossed off the morning's field module with a pen stroke. Done. No lecture, no drill, just the presence of someone who'd already taught enough. And across the base, the tone of conversation was changing. Not out of fear, but because now they knew. Discipline doesn't mean passivity. It means knowing exactly when to act, and never needing to act again. Would you have stayed calm if someone slapped you in uniform? Do you think discipline hits harder than retaliation when the whole room is watching? Drop your answers in the comments. I read every single one. If this story reminded you what real strength looks like, hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on so you never miss the next mission. And share this video with someone who still thinks silence means surrender. Our next operation's already on your screen. Go watch it now. I'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place.